so they remain Hindu, and this carries on into the 20th century. So um, let's do that. So we saw that um, this dark age, trade, commerce, money, um, towns, they all disappeared. Um, and um, at best, you have small little kinglets, small little kingdoms in India, but no real sort of imperial structure, state structure in this vast country, just small king. And so at the local level, absence of sort of a sophisticated economic life or politics, you see life organizing itself at the local level. And it is at this point that the Varners become the castes. This is a general, sort of a long history dating back to really the Gangetic culture, 600 BC, 700 BC. But now we're more than 1,000 years later, and the caste system is definitely now established. And we saw it's the Brahmins on top, and then you have the landlord military people, the Rajputs, they're called. Then you have the farmer merchants, and finally at the bottom, you have the laborers, the slaves, and many, if not most of them, become untouchables. They become the lowest caste, and these castes, of course, are hereditary. They're You can't marry outside your caste, and so the society is sort of, and this setup is sort of reinforced by the um, the fact that you have in the villages there's very little contact outside the villages. They're isolated, and a barter economy develops in these villages between the peasants who supply grain and the relatively small number of artisans like shoemakers or furniture makers or iron sort of blacksmiths. And so these groups basically trade without any money. So this is the setup, and the setup um, um is this kind of a setup is defined as the Asiatic mode of production. And it was Marx and Engels who sort of established this idea of the Asiatic mode of production. Some people question it, but this is sort of the basis of it: the isolated barter economy in the villages. And what they said was that nothing happens. That is to say, no classes develop in this sort of setup, and there's no dynamic in the society. There's no real development. It's just reproducing itself at a very low level. It's the economy is not growing, and on top of this, the other factor that emerges is that eventually a big, powerful state does develop on top of this, and basically the state lives by extracting tribute from these villages, and the king, the emperor, tends to be a despot. And this is what does happen in the Muslim period. And why am I stressing this? Because it had a huge effect on the possibilities for development within India, but also from a scientific point of view. There was a 20th century scholar by the name of Godelier. The name doesn't matter that much. Maurice Godelier in France, who really developed this idea, this original idea, and he's the guy who really developed the idea of the Asiatic mode of production. And he said that we've already seen that the Ottoman state, with its millets, has some of the characteristics of this system. And also, we can point to the fact that the Inca and Aztec state also show similar characteristics. In other words, the Asiatic mode of production as a concept can be applied to similar, in a comparative way, to similar kinds of societies, and has been now. Researchers pushing this research a little bit further. There are just a lot of societies like what I've described, and this concept of the Asiatic mode is used to sort of analyze these kinds of societies. Now, that's the general idea, but what I could say about the overall result of this setup, this barter economy, or sort of autonomous or autarkic little economy, and the caste system, they became characteristics of Hinduism dominated by the Brahmins. And it explains why, when the Muslims and the British came in as conquerors, the Indian society at the base, at the local level, more or less remained the same right through the centuries. So that's why I'm stressing the Dark Age. But let's move on. And what we see is the intrusion of the Muslims. In three waves, the Muslims come in from Afghanistan, and they conquer India, especially the sort of northern and central part of India is conquered by the Muslims. The first wave of intrusion was in the 8th century AD. Then in the late 10th and 11th century, a second wave of Muslim invaders. And finally, and here we come to our principal subject, the Mughal Empire, in the 16th century, another wave of Islamic or Muslim invaders come in. So the 8th century, the late 10th and 11th century, and then the 16th century are the three waves of Muslim invasion. Now, let me explain how this happened. In the 7th century, way back, and I alluded to this in terms of the establishment of the Arab caliphates, Islam developed in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century. And it was carried beyond the Arabian Peninsula by Arab armies bursting out of Arabia, and these armies conquered the whole of the Middle East and North Africa, and they went further. In 711 AD, an Arab army crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and invaded and conquered Spain. Spain became Islamic from the beginning of the 8th century onwards. And we came into the story at the end in 1492. Remember the fall of Granada. During that whole period, the Muslims were occupying all or most of Spain, okay? But at the same time, that very year, that's why I mentioned it, 711, an Arab army from Iraq crossed Afghanistan and invaded northeastern India. And this army basically occupied that area of India, which has now become Pakistan, northwestern of the Indian continent, the northwestern part is now the state of Pakistan, and this Arab army occupied Pakistan. It didn't go further because that met resistance. The small Hindu states organized a resistance, and they were able to limit. There were also geographical factors, desert and so on, but the Arabs stopped basically in the area that today we know as Pakistan, and that was the first invasion. Now we come to the late 10th and 11th century, the second invasion of India. Um, the second invasion in India, and partly it was possible because by this point, these Hindu kingdoms were really decayed. They were politically a mess. India had become intensely divided, decentralized into small, very small states that had no power. And so the Muslims, the Islamic forces could advance relatively easily. And why did they come? Well, India is agriculturally very rich. There, there, that there is a very rich agriculture in India. Even today, I mean, when you go there and you see that in some places where there are good rains, Indian farmers can get 4 crops a year. You can grow 4 crops on the same piece of land. And the variety of foods and so on that are produced in India, well, we see India is one of the great cuisines. We go out and we enjoy Indian food. One of the reasons is that there was this incredible variety of interesting foods and spices that became part of Indian culture, which was made possible by this rich agriculture. Well, when I say these Islamic invaders, now we're not talking about Arab invaders. We're talking about Turks coming from Central Asia, where, of course, there's grassland. These people are pastoralists. They raise horses and various goats and sheep and so on. But those areas can become arid, and there can be a buildup of populations, both animal and human, and eventually it becomes a problem. So the people up there, they get larger number, and historically what's happened is again and again, these people who know how to ride horses, they move southward towards the agricultural lands, towards India, towards the Middle East, towards Europe. I've described this earlier. This is another cycle of that kind of movement. And so we see in the late 10th and in the 11th century that Turkish invaders have basically come down. Now notice that we already mentioned this with regard to the already with the Seljuks. It was the same phenomenon. So we're seeing this happen to Indians in a similar way to what happens. And of course, I've not even mentioned the Mongol invasions of Iraq and the Mongols in the 13th century. They ravaged the Arab lands. I'm leaving that out. This is another Turkish. The tribes are essentially they actually come from a place called Turkestan, and so in 962, these Turkic tribes, established themselves in eastern Afghanistan, a place called Ghazni, which has had its place in the recent Afghan wars. Ghazni is an important base, we could say, in Afghanistan for military operations. So 962, they're in eastern Afghanistan. Well, from there, they launch these invasions um, of northwestern India. They come down through Pakistan and as far as the Punjab, which is the Punjab is, I would say, agriculturally, the richest area of India. They occupy that. Uh, and in 1192, and this is all in key words, all these terms that I'm using are in key words. There is a Turkish leader by the name of Muhammad of Ghur, Ghur, Muhammad of Ghur, who meets a Hindu coalition at a place called Tarain in northern India, and the Hindus are defeated, and the whole of India is now opened up to Muslim conquest. So the first conquest was merely Pakistan, essentially. The second one, I would say 2/3 of India fall into the hands of the Muslims at this point. And this is the date is 1192, and they establish their capital at Delhi, which is still, basically still the capital of India. And they establish a sultanate, the Delhi Sultanate, 1192. And this Delhi Sultanate, the Sultan of Delhi, he lasts until 1526. There is a Sultan at Delhi. The local the Hindus are thrown back, they fight, and they're basically only able to sort of, the Hindus, in terms of political independence, only the South remains independent of the Muslim invasion. And I would say that this Muslim invasion was quite violent, and the Muslims, these Turkic people, they destroyed a lot of Hindu temples. There was a lot of violence, religious, well, it was political violence, but also religious violence. You can't distinguish. Why do I mention this? Because the Hindus remember this conquest. It was violent, and it has to this day, and the Hindu nationalism is very strong at the moment. It'll come and go. Things will change in India, but at the moment, the ruling party is an extreme Hindu nationalist party, and they bring up this stuff all the time. And of course, the Indian population is a mixed population. There are many millions of Muslims who live in the Indian state now, and this government, this Hindu nationalist government, persecutes them. And so this is a factor in contemporary politics, what we're talking about now. There's another reign later on at the end of the 17th century, which I'll mention, but this becomes part of the sort of ethnic memory of these people. And so this is a factor in the way people think in India. So I'm explaining. Now, the Delhi Sultanate, so we have this establishment of this Islamic state, this Sultanate. Many of the characteristics I've spoken about, the Arab sultanates and the Ottoman Sultanate, similar. But the difference is that, unlike the Ottoman state, which was centralized and so on, the Delhi Sultanate, although the Sultan in Delhi remained as the figurehead, de facto some of the leading generals in the Muslim army basically established quasi-independent principalities. They were not, this Delhi Sultanate was decentralized, is what I'm trying to say. Unlike the Ottoman state, because the Sultan couldn't enforce his authority, and so you have a kind of decentralized system where maybe formally they recognize the Sultan, but these powerful generals are basically controlling regional governments. Now, yes, the Muslims had come in, but they needed to rule, and in particular, they needed taxes to run the government, and particularly to maintain the military, the army. And so, very quickly, they, out of necessity, they had to deal with the Hindu elites. The Hindus, yes, the Muslims were the conquerors. They did dominate, but they had to seek the cooperation of the old Hindu political and social leaders. And so they tended to co-opt them. They invited them to participate in the government. The top offices remained in the hands of the Muslims, but the Hindus, they continued. And the old structures that I have spoken about, it all continued under Muslim control. This is the Delhi Sultanate, this is the centralized system. And moreover, I would say that, yes, the initial conquest had been brutal, but a certain coexistence developed between the Muslim elites and the Hindu elites. Live and let live. Let's negotiate, let's talk, let's cooperate. We need taxes from the common people. So the deals are made, business deals, and so on, and political deals. There's a certain coexistence. The Muslims are always in charge, but that's the way it is. And when I say Muslims, it should be understood that there's not a uniform Muslim population, because India is a big country, and the Muslims up in Pakistan today are very different from the Muslims who live in central India, and particularly the Muslims who live in what is today the state of Bangladesh. Yes, they're all members of the same religion, but their traditions, their customs, their language, it's different. So there's no homogeneity in the Muslim population. And of course, the same thing is true, and maybe more true, of the Hindus. There's huge diversity in this country, and so on. That has to be understood. But one thing I would say, the Muslim population, of course, the area known as Pakistan, that area was overwhelmingly Muslim. So was Bangladesh, Bengal. In eastern India, that area became thoroughly Muslim, and many of the towns in the north and in the center of India also a large Muslim population existed. Underneath that are the Hindus in the villages, okay? And I would say that it's very important to realize that the Muslim civilization is based on towns and cities. Going back to the Near East and so on, I explained the Ottoman Empire, and before that, it's all about towns. Towns are the centers of life. The Muslims in India reestablish money, towns, commerce. Where under the Delhi Sultanate, towns, commerce revive, flourish, money. But it has little or nothing to do with what's going on in the villages. in the villages, the barter economy, the autarky, the isolation. If you need a pair of shoes, there's an artisan. You can exchange your food for the shoes that your family needs, and so on. They're not involved in this kind of commercial, urban kind of activity. Um, so that is basically the setup. Um, um, I would also say that in the South, and this is in key words, a Hindu kingdom, a significant Hindu kingdom, does exist between 1336, the dates are given in key words, and 1646. There is a Hindu state called Nagara, Vishnaya Nagara. The kingdom of Vishnaya Nagara exists as a kind of independent state. It's only in the middle of the 17th century that this state is suppressed. So that gives you I've given you a brief outline of the Delhi Sultanate. But as I said, it was decentralized. The Sultan was a figurehead. And so it was that in the 16th century, a new wave of Muslim invaders, they were Turks again, came down through Afghanistan. Same cycle is repeating itself. And under the leadership of a magnificent leader by the name of Babur, he is the founder of the Mughal Empire. 1526, the Mughals conquered most of India, and the Mughal Empire comes into being. And this Mughal Empire, which was established in 1526, is going to last until the British seized power in 1756. So, what is that, 200 years? 200 years before the arrival of the British. And it's under the Mughal Empire that we can say that Muslim Indian civilization reached its perfection. That is to say, it developed into a really significant civilization, and as I will discuss in a few minutes, the cultural and artistic aspects of this Mughal civilization are fabulous. And so I'll be talking about that. And notice this is at the beginning of the 16th century. And we have to notice that this is the very time that the Ottoman Empire, Muslim Empire, and the Persian Empire. So we have these three great Islamic empires at the beginning of the early modern period. Now, Babur was a great general, and the term Mughal is the English translation is Mongol, Mughal, Mongol. And Babur traced his descent back to the great Mongol empires of the 13th and 14th century. He claimed that he was the direct descendant of Genghis Khan, the great Mongol leader. There were the Mongolian people, and then the Turks were under them. He claimed that his family went back to Genghis Khan, and then the second great Mongol conqueror was a fellow by the name of Tamerlane. Genghis Khan in the 13th century, and then Tamerlane in the 14th century. And this was, he claimed, legitimacy from this great Mughal Empire. So he is the conqueror. But after he disappeared, there was a certain amount of fighting, and it was his grandson by the name of Akbar, again, key words, who basically stabilized and consolidated the Mughal Empire in this in the second half of the 16th century until the beginning of the he died in 1605. Akbar basically created the elements of the Mughal state. I should just say further that one has to recall, just like the Ottomans, the Mughals produced in their arsenals rifles and cannons. The Europeans, of course, German and sort of northern Italian weapons were premier. The Asians even imported these German weapons, but they produced their own. These were no longer, gunpowder. Sometimes these empires are called gunpowder empires because you see now from the 16th century onwards, India, indeed China, Japan, Korea, everybody's using rifles, muskets they're called, or something more primitive, and they're using cannon. So the armies are equipped with gunpowder weapons from this time, and so is the Mughal army, which is very large. Now, just to sort of continue the story, the Akbar is the great. He's the greatest of the Mughal emperors. After his death, there's confusion and so on, and then in the second half of the 17th century, there is another. I'll call him great. His name is Aurangzeb, and he is a powerful military leader. He attacks the Hindus, unlike Akbar, who's liberal, as you'll see. And at the end of the day, he dies in 1707. Again, his name is given in key concepts. Aurangzeb, with the disappearance of Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire falls into a confusion. States break away, as they did in the earlier Delhi Sultanate, and a series of independent Muslim and even Hindu kingdoms reemerge on the continent, which sets the stage for the intrusion of the West. The English, but also the French, they now start to move in. The English and French East India companies. But we'll see how that develops later. I'm just giving you the end of the story. Now I'm talking about the organization of the Mughal state under Akbar and his successors at its height. We're talking about the second half of the 16th, the 17th century, and the beginning of the 18th century. What was the setup? Well, the setup was that the army was enormously large and in the hundreds of thousands. And maintaining it cost a lot of money. And also the emperors maintained a huge court at Delhi. And they had all sorts of other places of residence as well. And they built palaces all over northern India, and they all sorts of forts, palaces, temples. The Mughals were great builders, and the people who benefited obviously was the emperor, but there was a class called or sort of a stratum called the Mansabdars, who were the commanders of the army in the first place. I told you the army was enormous. There were several thousand of these people. And the top 500, these Mansabdars, they lived at the court. They were military men. They were courtiers, that is to say, they attended the emperor. They had their own residences, palaces, huge estates, but they were, it was all at the will of the emperor. They did not have, as in Europe, private property. It all depended on the emperor. In a way that's very similar to the situation in the Ottoman state. It's at the will of the emperor you hold this kind of big property. So this is the Mansabdars, and very often they moved around. The Sultan, in order to control them, he moved them around from one post to another. And let's talk just a bit about their ethnic origin. Well, there's been an analysis of this, and about 1/3 of these Mansabdars actually were Turks who came down with Babur and so on. Their families were part of this Mansabdar elite, okay? They were Turks. But there were also 1/3 were Persians from the Persian Empire. They came and they enjoyed the benefits of the Mughal Empire. Close connection between Persia and Mughal India. So 1/3 are Persians. And 1/3 of these Mansabdars are the old Muslim and Hindu elite. Again, I want to stress that. The Hindus are participating at a secondary level. At a secondary level, they are participating because the state needs them. They have the contacts at the grassroots. And also some of them are military leaders and so on. And so they are a sort of under element in this ruling structure. Now, over time, the local elites, the Muslims and the Hindus, more of them become Mansabdars, I would say, over time. So you have Turks, you have Persians, and you have the local Hindu and Muslim elite. Now, what I would say is that these people lived really well. They lived really well. It is estimated that if you take the 500 top Mansabdars, these people took 2/3 of the surplus produced in India, tribute and taxes extracted from the local level, delivered to the central government. This is a centralized government. 2/3 of the surplus. I mean, people live there. Basically, the way you analyze this, there's a certain subsistence level. It is historically determined. In Canada, subsistence, well, we're getting close to subsistence now. There's no surplus. It's just subsistence. I go to Loblaws, there's nothing left. It's just food. That's what's happening to us. But there's this average subsistence, and then there's beyond that, farmers produce a surplus. Well, the 2/3 of it was extracted and delivered into the hands of 500 people, including the Sultan, including the emperor. So they had enormous, of course, a lot of it went to the military, very large military, but the luxury spending and the luxury culture, now we get to the culture. These people had an ability to consume only, only today can it be matched. Today, we don't even see these people. The Musk and all these guys who are at the top of our society, we can't even imagine the level of consumption that these people have. Well, it was very much that way back in the day. That's what I'm saying. And so they had the money to consume it at a fabulous level. And I would say that the kind of the cities um, basically uh, the mass of the population are living in the villages. They have no contact. They don't deal in money. Uh, the cities essentially are producing luxury goods for this elite. And of course, the elite includes more than that. It also includes, of course, the local elites and so on. Most of production in the cities and the commercial life is directed towards supplying the consumption of the elites in society. The common people are not involved, except at the most minimum level. Um, Now, I would say that the we should also note the continued presence of the Portuguese. Remember, I talked about Goa. There's another town called Diu, and this is on the Malabar coast in southwestern India. There, the Portuguese continued to have their factories. They did business. That was the way they did business with the Mughal Empire. And this was a Catholic enclave in Muslim. So there's Muslims and Hindus, but the Christians, the Catholics, are established in and around Goa, and these Portuguese intermarry with some of the old Brahmin families or Rajput families, what we call high caste families. They become Christians, they become Catholics. And to this day, there is this element in Indian society. Um, the I would say that overall, the Indians did not import that much from Europe. I told you they wanted gold from if they were going to do business with the Europeans, Portuguese, later the Dutch, later the English and the French. They wanted gold because the Europeans were not producing anything except guns. They were interested in European guns. They were interested in European clocks, and they also imported architects from Italy. The uh, the um, the the Mughal Empire, the court, like the Taj Mahal. Take the Taj Mahal. This is considered to be the most perfect building of the Mughal Empire. It's a tomb, okay, and it is Persian. The architecture is Persian, but there are Italian architects we know were working on the Taj Mahal, and they built a significant number of other buildings in India under the Mughals. But what I want to point out is we see the Taj Mahal, but there are literally hundreds, and it could be thousands of exquisite buildings because these people had all the money in the world. And so they built this fabulous architecture. It's one of the things that tourists flock to see, the Mughal architecture all over the north, built by the elites because they had so much cash. Um, Now, Akbar was an interesting man because, yes, of course, he was a Muslim, but he realized that he had to get along with the non-Muslim population. So he was tolerant. For example, he didn't tax, unlike the Ottoman Sultan and later on the other sort of Mughal emperors, he did not tax the non-Muslim population, didn't tax the Hindus and the Christians. And he invited Hindu and Christian scholars to come to his court, and he organized debates between the different religions. Which is the true religion? There were these interesting debates at his court. There was an openness. This was a period of economic uh, prosperity, particularly for the upper classes. And so there was a certain tolerance. Plus, I would say that Akbar wanted to take a distance from the Muslim clergy. He didn't want to be under the Muslim clergy. He wanted this sort of political independence. So he opened up a little bit to the non-Muslim population. And indeed, it's said that there was discussions about which basically people were in the court were speaking about a universal God, a God that transcended all the religions, included all the religions. There was this monotheism that was universalist, I would say, which is so interesting. Um, well, uh, let's talk a little bit more about this culture. The Persian influence is very important. Persia was the production of this luxury culture. I mean, there were Turkish elements and there were Islamic elements, but I would say I would stress Persia. And um, the most refined people in the court actually spoke Persian. It's like in the old days when knowing French was a big deal in the West. You were cultured if you knew French. Well, if you knew Persian, that was a big deal under the Mughal Sultanate. Um, and actually, there is a language called Urdu in India, which is a kind of Persianized Indian language. It's called Persianized Hindi is known as Urdu, and it has these Persian elements in it. So the Persian element is very important. And we can see in terms of the development of the art, we see Persian influence. And by the way, in maps and illustrations, I have several illustrations, but where you can really find a lot of what I'm talking about is in Wiki. If you go under Mughal Empire Wiki, there's a whole section on this Mughal culture that I'm talking about, which sort of they give you illustrations of many of the things I'm talking about. So what did they like? They liked poetry at the court, just as in Persia. Poetry was very big, and also fine handwriting, writing beautifully, writing Arabic, if you like, in the most beautiful sort of script you could imagine. It was an art, but also they they produced miniature paintings, beautiful, which are some of these things are masterpieces, miniature paintings, exquisite miniature paintings, um, and um, I would say that it all comes out of this sort of very rich craftsmanship, artisans who perfect whatever they're doing. And so, beyond these artistic creations, at a lower level, are beautiful furniture, exquisite furniture. The palaces, there were gardeners who laid out and produced most beautiful gardens with fountains and so on for the elite, for these people. They lived, as I said, extremely well. And in particular, they produced textiles, the craftsmen, the textiles, silk, but especially all kinds of cotton goods of a very high quality. Muslin, calico, and many other varieties of cotton manufacture. And this spread through the cities that I'm talking about. It was at first a luxury production, but people began to dress in cotton goods, in this beautiful cotton goods, very fashionable. And they began to, it developed to such a degree that a huge cotton manufacturing industry developed in India in the 17th and 18th century. India became the primary producer of cotton in the world. And this cotton was exported all over Asia, and significantly, the Europeans went crazy for Indian cotton textiles. It became to the point that serious balance of payments problems developed in the Western countries because people were basically importing all of this cotton goods from India. Indian cotton manufacture was all done by hand. Merchants, it's putting out system. Merchants are putting out to small spinners and weavers who are working up the cotton goods. And of course, the labor costs are very low. It's very unfinished. I'm sorry.